Everyone in my town is disappearing. They call it Sulaaphoria. My town is old, its roots deep and tangled, drinking something that has always been here. Almost everyone can trace their blood back to the first settlers, Finnish immigrants who laid the first bricks, built the first roads, carved the town from the earth. They came in boats, arrived in winters, walked the frozen forests and built homes where the ground swallowed their footprints. On the surface, it's like any other small town. Quiet, insular, familiar. But there's a tradition here, something that doesn't belong to us but we carry anyway. Something older than the town itself, Sulaaphoria. The church bells ring for it, the radio hums with it, the diner booths whisper it over black coffee. It used to happen rarely, once, twice a year, after long dedication, like a prize at the end of devotion. Now it happens every day. Somewhere, someone is achieving, somewhere, someone is gone. The first time I witnessed someone achieve Sulaaphoria was at the bar with Melody. "Did you hear about Hansel?" she asked, swirling her drink. "He achieved last night, just lay in the snow and poof, gone." Hansel had vanished 2 weeks ago. The night after that, Dave spent hours lowering himself into hotter and hotter water, grinning as steam curled from his skin. Melody and I were growing desperate. We had tried everything: wax burns, sauna sits, fasting until our ribs counted for themselves. Nothing. We were still here. That night, the bar was packed, wall to wall. No laughter, no breaking glass. The usual drunken shouting had been replaced by something quieter, something electric. I tapped someone's shoulder. "What's going on?" Arthur turned. Gaunt, cheekbones carved sharp, his skin stretched thin from months of the water diet. He had the look of someone almost there, someone waiting to be taken. "They found a new way," he whispered. At the center of the room, 3 young men stood in black togas, each holding a shot glass. The crowd held its breath. In perfect unison, they drank. A single second stretched, unbearably long. The air shimmered. Then their bodies softened, blurred at the edges like a heat mirage. The folds of their skin began to separate, like liquid pulling apart. The moment hung, viscous, heavy. They dissolved. Their clothes collapsed onto the floor, still damp with sweat and spilled liquor. Sulaaphoria, the crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, people slamming their glasses down on the bar, ordering rounds of tequila. I'll have what they had. That's all it took. Melody nudged a crumpled toga with the toe of her shoe. How long have we been trying? All they did was, what? Do some fucking shots? People were vanishing everywhere now. A diner had lost their entire staff overnight. Kids wandered the streets, their parents gone mid-breakfast, their plates still warm. It wasn't that it was strange, just disappointing that it hadn't happened for me. I ordered a shot of tequila, same as the 3 from before. I closed my eyes as I tipped it back. Swallowed, waited, nothing. The bar was suffocating. My vision doubled. Was this it? Was this the moment before? Maybe I wanted it too much. Through the blur, I saw Melody across the room, swaying, eyes fluttering, deep in conversation with a group of strangers. I pushed through the crowd, their words tangled together, melting, dispersion, flux, all spoken with an evangelical urge. It wraps around you, pulls you through, then bam, gone. A man turned toward me, his expression shifting. "What? Have you seen?" The world tilted. Something clenched in my stomach. My breath felt too slow. The light smeared across my vision. I muttered something, maybe something blasphemous. It was one thing to speak of how someone achieved. It was another thing entirely to claim to know what happened after. Only the ones who see had that right. His expression darkened. Before I could react, his fist caught me across the jaw. I hit the floor, too dizzy to get up. The crowd laughed, Melody shouting for them to stop, but I hardly noticed. The floor was sticky with sugar and evaporated beer. It was warm, hopeful. My limbs numbed. The bodies above me blurred, undulating like wax, shifting, changing, melting into each other. Then I saw him, the man who hit me, his skin creased, pulled open, unzipped, droplets of him lifted into the air, tiny globes of light reflecting the faces of the crowd. Each drop held something, a memory, a moment, dissolving, fading away. His body remained for a second longer, hollow. Something moved inside, a thread-thin worm, white and delicate, crept forward. It lingered, drinking up the droplets, pulling them into itself. It did not look hurried or full. By the time I blinked, there was nothing left but clothes. The music swelled back into focus. The crowd cheered, bodies pressing against each other, breath warm, damp, drunk with it all. I turned to Melody, my breath unsteady. "What was that? Did you see that?" She scoffed, kicking at the empty clothes on the floor. "Yeah, a bunch of bullshit is what that was." I didn't remember getting home. I woke up to a hangover and a phone call. Melody's mother. She was crying, but it wasn't grief. "She was so sick after the bar," she said. I told her that's what happens, but then the vomiting stopped and Sulaaphoria. A breath, shuddering, reverence. "It was beautiful, Jessica. I wish you could have been there." Melody was gone. Just like that. I pressed my hand to my stomach, waiting for something to twist, to ache, but I only felt empty. As it says in the methods of Sulaaphoria, the dispersed, live on your breath. So, I exhaled. I collapsed back into bed, tried to sleep the rest of it off. I kept the radio on while I worked the next day, 93.7 FM, The Melt. The host's voice was warm, unhurried. "A record number of achievements this season, folks. We'll be taking calls after the break. Who do you think will be next? Could be you, could be me, could be your next-door neighbor. Ain't it a beautiful thing?" Outside, people sipped coffee at the cafe, gossiping about who might be next. The diner across the street was short-staffed again. More empty aprons left in the back, more half-eaten meals cooling on abandoned plates. No one seemed alarmed. I kept shelving books, trying to focus, but my fingers caught on something strange. A book I didn't recognize. It wasn't in the system, no barcode. A pamphlet slipped free. Its cover was cracked, gold lettering peeling at the edges, but I knew the word, Sulaaphoria. Beneath it, a subtitle, The Tracts of the Seers. Inside, the handwriting was uneven, jagged, smudged, where the ink had been pressed too hard. A passage caught my eye. Abe the First went away with the snow, and Claire followed in the water. We all knew that phrase, one of the first things we were taught, a simple way to remember the methods. But beneath it, in handwriting that did not belong to the original text, who saw them go? A seer. A weight settled in my chest. Someone had left this here. Someone wanted me to read it. At the back of the pamphlet, a note. Come before sundown, an address. I shut the book, tucked the pamphlet inside. I could pretend I never saw it. I could throw it away. Instead, I grabbed my coat and stepped out into the cold. The windshield was frozen over, a thin pane of ice sealing me in. A perfect sheet of white, like the world outside had been scrubbed away. I turned on the defrost, but the cold clung stubbornly to the glass. I reached into the back seat, fingers stiff as I fumbled for the scraper. My knuckles ached, the dry air pulling at my skin. The moment I touched the handle, something shifted. A whisper. Soft at first, curling at the edges of my ears, barely louder than my own breath. It was easy to ignore, like the sound of the house settling at night, the distant hum of a street lamp, something just on the verge of being real. The ice on the windshield cracked, a fine hairline fracture, webbed outward, slow and deliberate. The whisper wasn't alone. More voices joined, layering, shifting, a chorus, pressing against my ears. Some were too distant to hear, some felt too close. My breath came shallow, my pulse knocking against my ribs. The voices tangled, rose, folded over each other. The more I tried to make sense of them, the worse it became. My name, not spoken, but exhaled. Melody, I whispered. The windshield groaned, the fractures deepened, spidering outward, the ice straining against itself, warping under a pressure I couldn't see. It wasn't the defrost, it wasn't the heat, it was something else. A quote from The Methods of Sulaaphoria came to me. They live at the moment of liminal matter. I gripped the scraper tighter, but my hands were useless. The voices wove through the air, a low hum beneath my skin, a vibration in my bones. The glass shuddered. I was sitting in my car, the heater blasting, and I had never felt colder. A voice, breathless and hollow like wind through bone. Jessica! I threw the door open and stumbled onto the pavement, the cold biting into my skin. My breath came hard and fast, vapor pluming into the air. The world had emptied, no wind, no whispers, just the weight of the quiet pressing down on me thick as snow melt. I stood still, waiting. My ears rang with the absence of sound. My fingers flexed around the scraper. The windshield was still frozen, the fractures holding steady. The ice had just begun to melt. I forced myself to move, scraping away at the frost, my hands trembling. I should have gone to the address. I didn't. Instead, I went home. The house swallowed me whole. The door shut behind me, the air thick, humid, stale. I stood in the dark, waiting for my body to feel like it belonged to me again. I called for my dog. Arcades? No paws against the wood. No skittering claws. Come here, bud. Silence. The kind that settles over a graveyard. I stepped into the kitchen. The faucet dripped, the sound loud in the stillness. The water in his bowl rippled, his collar rested beside it, the red nylon damp coiled into itself like shed skin. His tag gleamed under the kitchen light, unreadable, as if the letters had been smudged out. I knelt, reaching for the collar. It was still warm. I pressed my fingers to the floor where he should have been. No fur, no sign that he had ever existed except for the space he left behind. This isn't happening, I thought. Animals don't achieve, do they? I thought about calling someone, anyone. But who would I call? Melody would know what to do. But Melody was gone. My father was gone to the mist off a boat, and my mother in the steam of a shower. Something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned. The water in Arcade's bowl trembled, single ripple breaking across the surface. I bolted to the bathroom. The mirror was fogged over, my reflection barely visible, warped, stretched. I peeled off my jacket, turned the shower knob, and let the steam rise like breath from a chasm. Heat wrapped around me, thick and cloying, dampening my skin before the water even touched me. I stepped inside. The hot water pounded against my skull. My muscles loosened, my thoughts dissolved. I closed my eyes and let myself drift. Jessica. My eyes snapped open. Water streamed down the walls, gathering in slow, crawling rivulets. The steam thickened. Something moved in it, not a shape or a person, just a sense of something. Jessica! I turned too fast, feet slipping against the wet tile, caught myself on the wall. My fingers dragged through the condensation, leaving frantic, smeared lines. The whisper came again, closer. Jessica! The steam curled around me, pressing into my skin, heavy, clinging. A dozen voices, 100, 1,000. Then they all spoke at once. Seer. The air snapped, the voices vanished, the steam exhaled. I stumbled back, hit the shower knob. I clutched the sink, staring at my reflection through the thinning fog. My face looked wrong, hollow. The whispers were gone. But they weren't really, they had always been there hiding in the liminal matter. I understood. I turned off the water, pulled on my clothes with shaking hands. I didn't want to be in the house anymore. I didn't want to be alone anymore. I grabbed the tract of the Sears and my car keys. The note had said, "Come before sundown." I was going, because what else was there to do?